There we go. All right, welcome everybody. Just waiting for a few more people to queue up here before we get started. Okay, I see everyone's queuing up here into the Zoom session. We're gonna just give a second here for everyone to hop into Zoom, and then we're gonna start this session on Essence. Okay, looks like just about everybody's here right now, so we're gonna get started. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Joey Spooner. I am the Vice President of Community Development and Product Management here at Kanban University. And today I have the honor of introducing you guys to Simon Girvan. He's a good friend of mine now at this point. We've gotten to know each other really well, and he's going to introduce to us today the Essence Cards for the Kanban method. So Simon, would you like to introduce yourself, and we'll dive in from there?
Great, thanks, Joey. Yes, as Joey said, my name is Simon Girvan. I work for Ivar Jacobson Consulting, Ivar Jacobson International, actually it's a proper name. And I'm one of their consultants, so I focus on Essence especially, but I've got a long background as an Agile coach. A long time ago, I certified as a Kanban practitioner. I've been around Kanban and Agile methods for some time. And I've also authored a book on Agile from first principles. So I've got a strong Agile background as well as the Essence background.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Simon. So with everyone here lining up now, I'd like to ask you guys a few questions so we can get to know who you are in this webinar session, so we can kind of tailor this talk to your problems and your needs, and also who you are in terms of your background. So I'm going to ask you just about 4 questions, and then we're going to go from there into this material that Simon has to share with you all. And we're also going to share an example of what it looks like to use the Essence cards as well. So it's going to be a lot of fun today. I think it's going to be worth your time. So let's start off with the first poll, which is just a simple one, which is really around how many years have you been using this Essence stuff? So some of you might have actually used Essence already. If you have, go ahead and plug it in there. If you haven't used it before, just say less than a year, basically. So you might be more curious than anything about Essence. Awesome, thank you. So lots of newbies here. This is great. All right, give you just a few more seconds here to answer. Okay. And now I'm going to share the results for you all to see. It looks like almost everyone here, except for 4 people, are pretty much new to the Essence cards, the Essence approach. And so I'm excited that you're here. We're going to definitely have a good time going through all of this material. So I'm going to take you through one more question just so I can kind of know a little bit more about you guys. This is more of a Kanban question. So some of you guys are Kanban curious. Maybe some of you are actually experienced in Kanban. Maybe some of you are really experienced. So we just want to know kind of how many years you've been putting in with Kanban. All right, almost everyone's answered. This is great. Okay, looks like everyone has settled on their decision there. I'll share the results. So it looks like it's kind of a good spread today. We've got some seasoned people here, some more than 4 years people. We've got a good number of people who have been doing it for a little bit more than a year, but less than 3 years, which is great. And then a couple of brand new people to the Kanban method, less than a year. So welcome. We're glad you're here. Excited to have you here. So we're going to dive into it quite a bit in terms of how Kanban and Essence can play together. So like I said, I have 4 questions, then we're going to jump into the material. Here's this third question, and we're going to use a kind of a mural for the last question here. So the third question is really, oh, whoops, wrong poll. Let me go back. It's this poll. Are you basically a manager, a scrum master, product owner? You can check more than one because some of us wear more than one hats, honestly. So we'd love to see what you guys are doing here. And ladies, guys and ladies, here we go. All right. Well, this is just exciting. Okay, a few more seconds here for you to finish your answers.
I guess if you're one of the people marking other, you could pop in the chat if you think it's helpful. What other means in your context?
Yeah, so here's the result. So we've got some managers, definitely some scrum masters, a couple of product owners, agile coaches for sure, and then the other category, like Simon said. So if you are in the other category, feel free to pop in and say, hey, this is what I have as far as a background. I don't know if we have that webinar feature enabled, but if you do, can put a comment in there, go for it. Okay. So now that we have that final piece done, let's see if we can pull off this last little bit of understanding of who you are and kind of where you're about. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see what we're trying to do here with you all. It should be kind of fun. And I just saw a question pop up, wanted to answer it really quickly. Yes, this session is being recorded. It will be shared publicly in due time once it gets processed. So just a heads up, we should be able to communicate that when the recording is live. Okay, final piece here. It's around you as an individual. So some of you guys, like you said, your managers, your scrum masters, your product owners, we'd love to know a little bit more about your challenges that you face right now, so to speak. So we have this grid set up, and it's really simple. We're going to give you access to it in just a moment. But we have this vertical axis that you have a problem within a team or around a team. You may have a problem that's across the enterprise. You may have a problem or a challenge that's really with leadership, less than the enterprise, more to do with leadership and leadership behavior. And then there's an x-axis here. It's not too challenging, but it is a challenge. Or it's somewhat challenging. I'm still having issues trying to get through this one. And very challenging. I'm banging my head against the wall on this problem. We'd love to know these answers because it's going to help us to kind of figure out how to communicate the essence material to you as well. And we put some examples in here for you to reference. So for example, getting the right kind of attention from our leadership. That's a leadership kind of problem. Sits up here at the higher level leadership challenge. And down below, you can see it's somewhat challenging for this person who put this in. So that's a very simple example that hopefully makes sense to you. So when you go onto this mural, double click to add a sticky, and then move that sticky to where you think it belongs for you. I'm going to share the link to that now, and we'll see how this works. There we go. Let's see if this works. Okay, and if you folks can't see this mural link I just sent, please let me know. It looks like it's working though. Yeah. So Simon, chat is enabled.
Ah, good.
That's the easy answer there.
Although
Okay.
I'm not sure, it might just be for us. But if it could be enabled for everybody, that would be probably good.
Yeah, true.
Although we are seeing the Q&As pop up, which is good.
Okay. Okay, so Karen says it's working now. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys like about 2 minutes here to put down sort of what your challenge is and where you see it being, where you see it. Okay. And if you have questions about using the mural, folks, just let us know. I'll be happy to answer them here in the Q&A. Okay, you got about a minute left to just write down a simple sort of statement about your challenge and place it either in the leadership level, enterprise level, team level, and then sort of what level of challenge is it for you. Yep. Okay, great. Thank you all for filling these out. I see some of you are new to mural, some of you are mural experts, so thank you so much for dropping this stuff in. These are some great ones. Okay, about a little less than 5 seconds left. Feel free to drop it where it makes sense for you. All right. Exciting stuff here, folks. This is a good distribution overall. And so we see quite a bit. Lack of motivation at the team level, implementing WIP limits and when to do so. That's a great one. And let's see here. Right, getting pull approach to work. Right, and then you're one coach for 7 to 8 teams. That's going to be a big challenge for sure. A couple other ones here that we see. Shifting from project-based funding to probably product-based funding is my guess. Combining coding and non-coding tickets on one board. That's a fun one. And let's see here, adopting the same Kanban board and principles. Ooh, yeah, that's a big challenge there. In fact, that's probably an interesting anti-pattern. So that's a fun one to see what's going on there. Let's see, team member empowerment when leadership approaches and styles are control and command. Yeah, that's a great one. That's a good challenge here, folks. Support in roles, creation, and full staff allocation. Yeah, these are big problems here. Getting leadership on board for an agile transformation. Ooh, that's a good one. Okay, and just the last one here, I'm kind of picking out getting everybody to work together when it means going against the current culture. Oh, these are juicy problems today, folks. I didn't expect Wednesday to be so good. So thank you very much for this feedback, for this input for us to look at. And we're going to work on that a little bit as we kind of go through some of these essence cards here. So I want to give the control over now to Simon to share his part of this presentation. So he can walk you through what the essence cards are. And as you look at that, you might want to see kind of where some of these cards from the Kanban method might click in and help you with some of these problems. So this will be fun. Here we go, Simon. I'm going to hand over the control to you, sir, to share your screen, and we'll go from there.
All right. So I'll share my screen. I've just seen the cat arrive as well, so hopefully he won't be contributing. He was with my wife the other day, and he got her password wrong enough times for it to reset, I think, just by walking over the keyboard, but hopefully he'll not do that.
Fingers crossed.
And somebody set a burglar alarm off as well. That's probably my house because we had a power cut just before we came on. And I've got my phone ready, tethered if I need it, but hopefully that isn't too irritating.
No, I barely hear it, Simon, so go for it.
Oh, good. So I want to talk a little bit about Essence. So from the poll we saw earlier, most people are unfamiliar with Essence or not familiar with it for more than a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit about why Essence arose and what it's for. And I'll try to do this in a very short time. One of the interesting things with Essence is a bit like Agile, and actually a bit like Flow and Kanban from the previous section, is it sounds quite simple, but it requires a bit of a mindset pivot to really get the most from it. And you're not going to get that in a 10-minute overview. So I'll give you the quick version of Essence, and I could probably sit here and bore you, for most of the day on it. But here's a nice little cartoon from Comic Casuale, which talks about Essence and the kind of conditions that led Ivar Jacobson and the colleagues at CMAT to recognize there was a problem and to do something about it. And it's the problem of having the methods war. So you've got all these different methods, and typically a method is led by some organization or a guru perhaps, and it tries to do everything. It tries to be quite all-encompassing. And that's sort of okay from a marketing perspective, but one thing we know is that one size doesn't fit all. And when you want to change or you want to make evolutionary change, if you've got a restrictive framework, can be quite hard. But the other thing is when you look inside those frameworks and those methods, actually lots of the same things are going on. So we have things like Scrum and Kanban and participatory budgeting or Lean and user stories, and all sorts of things are happening in many of the frameworks, but it's not obvious, and you can't necessarily mix and match. So they have this idea of freeing the practices from the method prisons. And there's a number of reasons why that's a good thing that I won't go into, but one of them is that you can treat each practice separately. So managing and understanding a small thing is easier than managing and understanding a big thing. So focusing on a practice and decomposing a method into its constituent practices allows you to focus on practices one by one, understand them better. And that kind of decomposing a big complex thing into smaller, simpler things, might still be complicated or complex, but they're smaller. That's a theme we'll come back to in a second. So knowing that these methods were a bad thing and we wanted to access the underlying practices, what did they do to create Essence? Well, the first thing they did was find a common ground. And when you look at these different methods, they're all solving the same sort of problem. They were all helping organizations create solutions to business problems of one sort or another. And largely, it didn't matter which one you picked. They could all work well. So they must be doing something in common. And what Essence identified is a set of things that we always care about. We always care about the opportunity we're solving, the stakeholders around it, the requirements that specify what our solution or software system is, the work that the team does, and then the way of working that they adhere to. And these are true for all the different methods. So if that's true, then probably we can have some consistency and some standard. So the next thing was to say, actually, if we can have a common ground, can we have a common language so that all the practices can be described in the same way? And Essence has come up with a common language. And there's only a few things. I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but there's things that we do, like activities, and they're grouped in spaces. There's things that we work with, like the products, the work products, and things called alphas that are a kind of an abstraction of things we really care about. And that's what Essence is. It's a combination of the Essence kernel, which is the common ground, and the language that you can use to describe the kernel, but also practices. And then they wanted to make it an open standard. This isn't about controlling the practices, it's about freeing them. So you want to make it open so anybody can use it. And you can use it in a couple of ways. You can just take Essence as a standard and use it on its own. So each one of those things I talked about has a little description, and it has the states that you can be in. So your stakeholders move through these states. They're recognized, then they're represented, they get involved until ultimately they're satisfied in the system that you've produced. And for each of these states, Essence defines some checklists. So you can see, what does it mean for the stakeholders to be represented? These things get ticked. So they've agreed their responsibilities, they're authorized to be stakeholders. There's a collaboration approach agreed with the stakeholders and the team, and the way of working is supported and respected. Now, again, those seem quite simple, but if you think about your teams and you think about challenges that you're facing on the board a second ago, there's an awful lot of it depends underneath lots of these questions. So what they really do, and one of the real powers of Essence, which makes it really good for agile teams, is it's a thinking framework. It gets you talking and it gets you thinking. So even at the base level, you can use these cards and these Essence states to ask your team, where are you? When you think about how you work with your stakeholders, answering the questions will tell you which state you're in. And if you think you're down in state in agreement, but you've missed some checkpoints further up, so say, for example, you haven't a way of working that's supported and respected, that's probably a risk. So you've got that kind of value from Essence. But what we're really here to talk about today is the other way you can use Essence. And that's to say, I've got a practice like Kanban. Essence has a language that can be used to describe practices. So that's what I want to do. I want to create a new practice, or describe a practice using this language. So if Essence is this, let me move on to now to tell you what Essence is not, because this is a common misconception. Essence is not another method. It's not a competitor to SAFe or to Kanban or to Scrum or to anything else. Instead, it makes the practices and methods that you've got better because you've got this common language. Each practice can be related back to that common ground. And because you've got a common language, you can see how practices relate to one another. You can see where they overlap, you can see where the gaps are, you can see where they help you, and you can see where they don't. So it provides a really good way to understand your practices in more depth. And when you understand the practice, you're going to apply it better and you're going to get better results. The final thing is, because the language is quite simple, if you want to add your own bits, you can add your own bits. You can add things that are unique to your organization. You can change the language to fit your culture. And you can borrow from existing practices and build on them, extend them, or you can write in Essence your own practices that you've invented in-house. And there's a slight extra benefit that when you do that, you also get, you tend to get better quality practice because the language asks questions of your practice that makes you fill in the gaps. And this is a picture Ivar likes to talk about as well. If you're familiar with the parable of the 5 or 6 blind men and the elephant, they each touch a different part of the elephant and they all express with confidence what the elephant is, and they all are correct, but they don't see the whole. And Essence is a bit like that. It is a kernel, it is a learning aid, it does help you think, it does have practices, but actually it's all these things at once, and it's more. Final little bit before we look at what it means for the Kanban practices is why do we care about it? Well, there's a whole range of things, but in summary, for organizations, it gives you an ecosystem of practices that helps enable autonomy and alignment. So we talked earlier, some of the notes Joy showed were about leadership buy-in and changing culture. Well, you can kind of cope with that a little bit by creating practices that reflect your culture or reflect your language. You can add this bespokeness. And then for teams, a lot of the value is in learning and understanding practices better. Jeff Sutherland talks about Scrum when he says that something like 58% of Scrum implementations are poorly implemented, and that's why they don't succeed. One of the best ways to be sure you're implementing a practice well is to understand it properly. And Essence helps you understand it, and it does that by that same decomposition that led to Essence being founded. So breaking a method into practices. When we have a practice, we break it into its constituent parts. We separate it out based on those language elements, as I'll show you in a second. And that means we can focus on just one part of a practice, say team replenishment, understand that really well, improve how we do that, and we've now got a team that performs better without having to look at the whole of Kanban just by focusing on one thing. And there's a few things we can do to help prioritize that as well. And there's tooling. So I'll show you a little bit later. We do have some tooling. We're just about to go live with some beta testing. So at the end, I'll share a link that you can sign up to that if you're interested. We'll start with Scrum focus, but quite quickly add in some Kanban stuff. And that's really about helping teams understand practices better, give them lots of ideas and prompts to improve how they work, and to really bring the practice awareness into the tooling in a way that something like Mural struggles with. So I'll pause for a second in case there's any questions. And thankfully my alarm has stopped. And I appreciate there's a lot of coverage there, but the summary is that Essence helps you be better at practices.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Simon. There is one question that came through just a moment ago. It's a question around who developed Essence. Is it a community initiative?
Essence was originally developed by an organization called CMAT, which stands for Software Engineering Method and Theory. And it was founded by Ivar and 2 colleagues, Richard Soley and Bertrand Mayer. But it's actually a kind of community-led organization with a whole set of signatories from academia, from industry and individuals. They started it off with a call to action, which basically said, you know, this dominance of methods that you jump from one to another as like following a fashion trend is unhealthy for the software industry. Do you agree? And within a very short time, there was thousands of people signing a call to action, and that's where it came. CMAT's a non-profit making body. It's got lots of organizations that are supporting it, IGI, who I work for, being one of them, but also many others, Fujitsu, Tata, a whole range of others. And it is very much community led. The standard is open and free. You can go to the OMG website and download it. And we do quite a lot of work in the kind of online community trying to promote it. There's a LinkedIn group and so on.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Simon. So I think we're ready for the next part.
So what does that mean in terms of Kanban? So we've said that Essence is it's a kernel and it's language, but really you don't actually need to understand that to get value from the cards. So I'm going to show you 2 of the Kanban cards first, and then I'll go through the whole practice very briefly. So when we look at a card, this is the card for the service, and this is how you read it. So the language is visual, so it tells you what kind of a thing this is. This is the thing called an alpha, which has different states. So our Kanban service goes through the states of identified, visualized, through to being in flow. There's a brief description of it. It's got a name, and it also tells me how it relates to the Essence kernel or to other elements. And that's quite important because it's not just a flat, static, independent card or a glossary of this part of Kanban. Essence helps you understand how the different bits of a practice relate to each other. Here's an example of one of the activities. It's got slightly different, you can see there's a slightly different icon, and this is the team replenishment. So we know what the description is, but we see here why we're doing it. This is about helping us prepare to do the work, and it requires some competence to do that. And then this is what it achieves. The purpose of this activity is to get our work prepared. It's to help our service become visualized, and it's to get our work items selected and our pool of work into an ordered state. So that's really useful because quite often people forget some of the purposes of activities. So this has them all on a card. So just as a card, you can have a nice reference to the bit of Kanban that you're interested in. And when we look at the rest of Kanban, we've got 3 parts in the purple, which are the Team Kanban Essentials, which are the things that we work with, the things that we do, and things that help us. But before we look at those, there's also these orange ones. So these are part of a slightly separate practice called Kanban Foundations. And these are the kind of general practices that Kanban has. So we know about these, those of you that are Kanban experts. Oops, scrolling the wrong thing. So we have manage flow. I'll use the magnify thing in Mural. Manage flow, visualize, and make policy explicit. So here we've got, again, a description of what that means. But what we've done here is create a kind of do's and don'ts. So if you're visualizing work in Kanban, it means you visualize all your work on widely visible Kanban boards. You don't hide your work, and you don't pretend you work in a way that you don't. So it's got some guidance there. And this allows us to do some of the stuff that Essence supports really nicely, which is play games. You can imagine moving that on a scale as to how well we do that or how poorly we do it, or how important these practices are to each other by ranking them. And then the other foundational parts of Kanban are the change management principles. Start with what you do now, gain agreement, and encouraging acts of leadership at all levels. And again, we've got some guidance as to what that means. In this case, it's the happy and sad for the principle. So a team that's really great at the principle, the change management principle of gaining agreement, well, they're embracing change and regularly performing evidence-based experiments to continuously improve their way of working. On the other hand, a terrible team would be having change forced upon them and often expected to adopt new ways of working that replace rather than build, so that losing the concept of that evolutionary change. And the final 3 foundational principles are the service delivery, around understand and focus on the customer's needs and expectations, managing the work and reviewing the network. And then the final thing we have inside the foundation practice is our class of service archetypes, where again, we can describe on a simple card what these mean. So you've got a little picture. So you can read it, little picture, little definition, and the 4 types. Should have locked these, shouldn't I? The 4 class of service archetypes there. What this shows quite nicely is that Essence helps you remember things. So rather than having to remember the class of service archetypes or go and look at the Kanban guide, having the Essence cards printed out by your desk or in a workshop means that you can quite quickly refer to them, and it stops you forgetting about them or relying on memory too much. One of the bits of feedback we got from, I think it was Andrew Kidd, one of the Kanban coaches and consultants that we worked with developing these cards and these games, was that this helped him as a coach go beyond being the practice referee. So lots of coaches end up being the person to ask questions about the practice. Now, if you've got the cards or you're using the tooling where you can click on a button and see it straight away, it just reduces that friction. Yes, you can go and look it up. You can go to Google or you can ask ChatGPT, but that's just extra steps. If you've got it at your fingertips, you're more likely to look at it, and the coach doesn't need to be the person with all the answers and the practice referee. Instead, they can elevate their coaching to where they can really help the team. So we've got the foundation stuff. Now let's dive into a little bit about what the Kanban practice looks like and how it breaks down into these elements. So the things that we work with, and I'm not going into this in too much detail because it's Kanban is relatively complex, a lot going on, and we could it takes 2 days to teach somebody the Kanban training, so we're not expecting to teach you it in 10 minutes. But we've got kind of three high-level things that two high-level things that we care about. So we've got our service, which is the main purpose of our main thing through which we're delivering value to our customer. And we've got the work item. Now, of course, in Kanban, we don't know two things. We don't know what types of work we're going to accept in our service, and we don't know what the states that work will move through in the service. So actually what we've done here is we've said, well, we know that the first state will be requested, and then we select the work once we commit to it. But actually, depending on the nature of our service, we might have different states, different columns on our Kanban board. So this is, left for the team once they build their service in their static workshop to decide exactly what states the work item goes through. And the same with work item type. We might know what types of work we have, and they might be things that have other Essence practices like user story or use case or feature, but it might be other things. So what this allows us to do is on the fly, when we are designing our service, capture the types of work that we want to process and create a little card that allows us then to map it. Because one of the parts of the static workshop, of course, is to understand what happens to each type of work as it moves through our service. Is it the same thing that happens, or do some different types of work get handled slightly differently? And then we've got the physical things that you can look at. So these are what Essence calls work products. So we've got our pool of work, and we can have different levels of detail for that. We can be just identifying it, or we can put it in order. We've got our Kanban board, and we've got some things here. And on the cards, this dotted line means it's optional. So you don't have to have your advanced policies visualized, but might be a good idea to consider. You've got your Kanban system definition, which describes your workflow and WIP limits and things like that. And you've got the metrics, the core Kanban metrics of lead time, delivery rate, and work in process or work in progress. So that's the core things. And again, I said earlier about how does Essence help teams learn a practice? Well, there's a nice little game you can play where you say, well, here's all the bits of Kanban or any practice come to that. How do they relate to each other? Draw a picture. I've got an example in a second, but it gives you a little bit of a clue. So we know that the Kanban board describes service, the definition describes the way of working and the service. So you've got some clues on the cards. But when you see a team play that game, and some of the coaches have run this with some of their classes with the Kanban cards, is it gets people talking. And that's what Essence really stimulates, is the communication between teams, and it gives lots of vectors for those conversations to happen, as we'll see in a second. Just briefly then, we've got the things that we do. We have our static workshop that I've mentioned. Now, the static workshop is quite an in-depth thing. You're not going to describe the whole of a workshop on a card, but that's sort of the point. Essence is about focusing on the essentials of practice, giving you just the things that are really important. There's going to be a different reference somewhere else. So in Kanban's case, it's the Kanban guide. In Scrum's case, it's the Scrum guide. It might be websites, or it might be books. But you've got the essentials on the card, but you're really expecting the people using the cards to know what they're doing and to know where to get the extra information. And we provide references on the cards. You don't necessarily use the cards to teach practice from scratch, although it's a really good aid to teaching in a classroom context. And then the other ones, we've got the team replenishment, the team Kanban, the team retrospective, and the flow review. And again, on these activities, the cards tell you what you're doing. So in the retrospective, the result of it is that you've changed something on your Kanban board. Perhaps you might have done some revision to your policies, and you're about keeping your way of working in a good state, in a working well state. And then the final little bit we've got is a few things that help the team in their Kanban. So you've got the core Kanban metrics, which are lead time, delivery rate, and work in progress, as I said. Then you've got your cumulative flow diagram, and then a little card here that helps you customize the service. So that's a very whistle-stop tour through what we've done with the Kanban cards. I'll give you a link later that you can download a set of these for yourselves as a PDF that you can print and so on, and you can use them in different ways. And I'll show you one way we can use them in a second, but I'll pause there in case there are any thoughts, or I can see a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, a few questions now. So Tatiana asked maybe the same question, but with two questions. She said, Simon, when do I know which tool should I use in my daily mural or essence or both? And by daily activities, she's thinking about the squad team.
Okay. So TeamSpace and a mural are complementary tools in the sense that mural is great at what it does. It replicates the conditions of a whiteboard and the kind of face-to-face meetings. And TeamSpace has elements of that as well. So if I show you what TeamSpace looks like, we've got some of the same games that we can play, so we can move things around. It's a canvas thing, but the big difference here is it's practice aware. So it understands about the practice, so you can click on it. So if you were using TeamSpace to do, for example, a retrospective where you wanted to focus on your Kanban, then using TeamSpace gives you the definitions of the Kanban practice at your fingertips. So you've got that support, but you've also got the ability to use the whiteboarding facility. It's got some extra stuff, especially if you've got big things you care about, like maybe big objectives or the performance of your team. You can track the state, you can capture the state you're at, and you can record it, you can capture to-dos and things. So they're quite complementary. You wouldn't necessarily use TeamSpace to do tracking of individual work items, but for example, it is a really good place to capture your work policies. So capturing your team's way of working. So for example, this is a Scrum example, but this team has built a board that really kind of focuses on how they do their Scrum, which sounds a little bit like making your work policies explicit. And this then becomes a bit like your team's constantly updated record of how you work. So any work policy you want to record and expose, then you would pop on the board. So things like, in this case, when they have their meetings, what time, which room, who's responsible for certain things. So that hopefully answers that question, Tatiana.
Yeah, thanks so much, Simon. So with that, we had two more questions before we may want to move on to our next part of this presentation. Someone anonymously asked, can we have a copy of the board? I'm assuming, anonymous attendee, I'm going to have to assume that you mean some of what Simon is showing. So Simon, I think we do have some things we can share with them. This is just
some things we can share. Yeah, I'm not sure. So some of the cards are, I need to think about whether we're sharing the cards at the moment. That's normally part of when we deliver training courses, that we include the cards as part of the training assets. But I'll have a chat with Joey and we can see what we can do. We can certainly share the headline stuff, and I can show you the instructions on how to play the games and PDFs that you can download that have all the cards and all the detail on them. They look like this, so you can print them off and you can create digital versions of those if you need to. And there are the two sets there, so you can definitely have those. They're already on the website, and I'll share the link at the end.
Yes. Yep. And also, just for those who are interested, if you need to contact us so we can kind of help you out and get what you need, here's a link to our website to contact us if you want to get more information than what Simon can share here. So we're happy to help you out where we can. One final question, Simon. It's from Richard Gower. Is there a cheat sheet or a set of cards for essence symbology? So somewhat of a legend. Okay.
So some of the card decks have them in it, but you can always go to the ivarjacobson.com website. There's an Essence in Practice section, and here you've got the what is essence, and it talks about the key concepts there. So there's always that, and inside the tooling it's there. But yes, the answer is for you, Richard. Okay. I won't go through this, but here's the result of a game that you could play with the cards, where you've taken the cards and you started with service in the middle, and we said, how do the other cards relate to it? So we've got, the metrics and the board describe it. You've got the static workshop involved, and you can add, sticky notes to annotate what you're doing. So this is a really nice exercise to play with teams. It's called Map My Practice, and you get a lot of conversations over what you put on the description of the relationship between events, between cards. You get conversations about whether there are relationships, and then you can get some interesting discussions about what the cards mean, and sometimes arguments where people don't believe what the card says. Now, Essence is about reflecting the practice in a fairly pure way. doesn't have an opinion on what's right or wrong. It's that this is what the guide says. So these words are what the guide says. And if the guide says that, then you might disagree, but it's what the guide says.
Very cool. So that's a pretty detailed explanation for it. So for the advanced coaches or the people who really want to get into the weeds on this, that's a very good example of what you might see happen if you play around with this in the team Kanban kind of space. And so, Simon, I think we have maybe one more thing to share with folks, the example that we put together of what could happen.
Yeah. So this is an example of a game that we designed with Joey in Kanban University and the coaches. And we tried to keep this really simple because, and I appreciate that what I've done to now is give you lots of quite detailed information. So we're trying to dial it back now. Joey taught me not to overreach when trying to teach people things. So this is a game that in the 10 minutes or so we've got before the questions, hopefully you should be able to grasp and you should be able to take away and use today or tomorrow with your teams if you wanted to. And it's based on some of the kind of power of Essence, but only uses one or two of the cards. So the scenario here is we have a team and they've been running whichever practice they have, whether it's Kanban or maybe Scrum, and they conduct retrospectives, but they're not that happy with the actions that they're getting from their retrospective, and they're not really seeing the improvement that they would expect to get. So what their coach suggested was, why don't we use the Kanban cards, the Kanban Essence cards, to see if they can give us stimulation to come up with better and more creative and different ideas. So we come up with this game for them to play. So here's the start point. So they've conducted the retrospective and they've done whatever they've done, the 4 Ls or Mad, Sad, Glad or Sailboat retrospective, and they've come up with a few things that they know they can improve. They've got some security stuff that slows them down. They not really clear on what the rules are, their policies. They've got some problems with automation. There's not consistency between the team and between the iterations. So that's the kind of results of their retro, and they weren't really sure how they would take that forward. So what we've done is run this little game with them. So the first thing is to take each one of those possible retrospective actions and categorize them. So a lot of the gameplay that we use in Essence, but also elsewhere, is categorizing games. So let's first of all narrow this down to things that we can solve and things that we can't. So one box is not in our power at all. So if that's something in here, then there's no point in us trying to find an experiment to improve it because it's not our power. You might have a box which is, we can address this, but not on our own. We need some help from other people. So in this case, the automation stuff, they need some help with because they haven't got the skill in the team to automate the tests, but they could get some help and do that. And then the third section is, this is in our power. We can control this. So that's things like forgetting to include the holiday in their planning, and then their own personal ways of working. So actually, this feels like a good thing to focus on. So we're not consistent in how we work, and we're not clear on the policies. So that then becomes the action item we take into the second part of the game, and we start to try to use the Kanban cards to help us do that. And what we're really doing is we're adopting this general practice of improving collaboratively, because this is a team exercise, and evolving experimentally. We want to pick a small number of experiments to help us improve our consistency, but what are those experiments? So the way this game works now is we say, well, let's look at the general practices. So we've only got the 5 other ones, and let's take our problem and look at it through the lens of each practice in turn. So if we look at our problem through the visualize lens, well, we could maybe display the policies on our board so everybody sees them and might spot ones that are missing. We might want to check that our tools are accessible. Maybe we've got our Jira locked down in a way that our managers can't see it. So there's a couple of good examples of experiments we could try to see if that improves our consistency. I'll pick another one, not go through them all, but say limiting our WIP. Actually, when we think about that card and the problem of this team, do we all know how to limit it? Do we have the confidence to know when we say no? Do we have maybe an expedite lane or an expedite policy that we could consider? So over the course of the workshop, they've come up with a number of different ideas. And the value of this is looking at the problem through a small lens, so back to that decomposing, is you can really focus on generating different and more innovative ideas. And that's one of the things that Essence allows you to do by having this card process. And it might be that there's certain cards that you don't think of any ideas. And then the final bit is good old-fashioned clustering, dot voting, and coming up with a couple of things to take forward. And at the end of the workshop, they decide, this is what we're going to do. We're going to run a policies workshop. We're going to capture the things. We've got, sorry, kicking the cat there. We've got an idea for how we might facilitate it. And we want to do an expedite lane experiment as well. And if we were doing this in the Teamspace product, you can actually right-click on or click on that and turn it into a to-do that you can tick off when you're completing things, and you can capture that in your team room. And in Mural, we might just put a sticky on there that says, "Hey, we've already booked that." And as a pattern of games, there's a number of different ways to run that, but that gives you the overall kind of picture of how using the cards as lenses to focus conversations, it demonstrates this thinking framework aspect of it, and it demonstrates the value in having even just a couple of cards with Essence practice. And of course, you can expand it. You could include the change management and service delivery principles. You could use this game with the practice cards, your retrospective, your flow review, and there's a number of ways that you can customize it.
Yeah, great, Simon. That's a really, hopefully some of the folks who are watching this are catching on to how to do what we think of as evolutionary change or managed evolutionary change, where we're trying to look at the environment that we're in, trying to figure out how to introduce a stress that might be good for the team in this case, and how they might be able to then try to experiment on resolving the stress or overcoming the stress that's there. So that stress reflect lead is kind of hiding in the mix of this game, for example. And for those of the Kanban proficient people here who have been through a little bit of our training, you might be like, well, there's more, there should be more here. And our goal right now is to keep it really simple. So to focus it primarily on the official guide to the Kanban method, as well as the team Kanban training that we provide to people. So the scope is initially for people just getting their feet wet, getting started with the Kanban method. And how do we actually make change happen once we understand some of the basics of the method itself?
The other thing we did think about is actually you would probably include a link to KMM Plus, which is the wider maturity model, and then you can use that as a prompt. So for example, in the making work policies explicit, then there was a couple of things around defining at least your basic policies and things like that. So you can use that as a way of triggering you off into other prompts like the KMM Plus. And you can click on some of these and see what the description is.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Simon. So we have about 10 minutes left for any questions that people might have. I know some people have been sitting here kind of watching and thinking and listening. If you have questions now, this is a great time to ask them. I think we've answered most all the questions that have come through so far. Let's see. Well, great. Tatiana is a great person here. So how can we measure the success of the team through this tool as throughput, WIP, etc.?
That's a good question,
Yeah.
Tatiana. So there's a number of ways that you can do it. Some of the games that we can play can result in a metric, in a quantifiable number. So for example, there's quite a lot of games where the teams might rank their perception of how well they do certain things or how important values are to them, and you can attach the result of that score as an attribute to those things. So much like you might with, say, a Spotify squad health check, track the trends, and you can turn Likert scores into numbers and things like that. But it's nice, that kind of self-reflection and self-analysis. So giving somebody a card of, say, the Kanban team retrospective and saying, on a scale of 1 to 5, how well would you rank our team's performance in how we do our retrospectives? Are we 5? We're awesome. We should be teaching people this stuff. Are we 1? We barely do them and they don't give us any value.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think Simon did a great job answering it. The one question I would have for Tatiana, and you're welcome to answer this, follow up the question here, is I was a little confused. Are we talking about success of the team in terms of their ability to improve their throughput and their WIP, et cetera, like looking at the metrics and helping them to focus on the metrics and improve their productivity? Or are we looking at improving their ability to adapt and evolve in their environment? I was a little bit confused by that. So I want to assume that it's basically the traditional, how do we improve the throughput of the team, that kind of thing. Yes, productivity. Thank you so much. So yes, that's what we were talking about. Okay, great. Okay, excellent. Other questions, folks? Anyone else have questions? Here we go. Richard, can we develop cards using the same standards for non-practices? For example, general problem solving or different problem solving methodologies, or used for guiding and training youth or children on subjects? Ooh, deep question for Simon.
That's a great question, Richard. So as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, there's a lot of essence that is really nothing to do with software. It began as a software initiative, but lots of things are really quite generic to lots of problems. For example, there's a set of agnostic agile cards that one of my colleagues, Richard Cook, has produced, which are on the Agile website. I'll put a link in a second, which are using non-technical language, but it's all the agile principles, but it's using language that's more, if you like, friendly for an organization, which is not very deep technically minded. So in that respect, using practices for guiding, say, for example, youth and children, there'll be lots of ways to do it. The language itself is really straightforward. You've got the things you care about, and that could be, it could be health or happiness or all sorts of things. You've got the things you actually produce, the work products, which might be things that record stuff. So learning outcomes, learning results, things like that. You've got the activities that you do, which help you advance the state of a thing you care about. And then you've got patterns or things that help you do it. So like the principles and things like that. So there's nothing really to stop you taking that structure of languages and cards and applying it to absolutely anything. It'd be fascinating to have a go at that, actually.
Yeah, so my advice to you, Richard, is to reach out to Simon and see where that goes between the two of you, because definitely an interesting, deeper dive into what you could do with these kinds of things. Well, great. If there are no more questions, I think this is a great time for us to wrap here, Simon. I want to thank you very much for giving us all this great information and walking us through what the Essence product can do for people in the Kanban space.
Let me put a couple of links in the chat for you. So there's the first link is to our free coaching cards, which is a whole range of things, but the top one, the best one, obviously, are the Kanban cards, which you can download. It's the things that I showed you as PDFs. And the second thing I wanted to share with you is the Team Space product that I showed briefly is, as I said, about to be launched for kind of beta users with the Scrum focus, which is about helping teams improve how they do their Scrum with some pre-built game boards or workshop exercises that you can run and the Scrum practice built in very quickly. We want to get a bit of feedback on that. We're following Joey's advice about starting where we are with some Scrum products, because we started building this before we did the Kanban stuff. But then we want to iterate quickly and apply some evolutionary change principles and get the Kanban stuff in there as well. And actually, there's a lot of value in having both practices, because very often we see teams that are doing Scrum but see value in Kanban or want to change to Kanban, and the other way around. And actually taking Scrum team, mapping how they do Scrum, and then applying the Kanban lens to their Scrum way of working is a really good exercise that can really help a Scrum team pick where they want to begin adopting Kanban without feeling they have to do the whole thing at once in one go. And we built some games to support that as well.
Yeah.
So that's the two links there. One is to the Team Space product where you can express interest, and if you sign up to that, then we'll send you a note when the product is available for you to try. And the previous one is a whole set of free agile coaching cards, including Scrum, all the Scrum at Scale, Spotify model, user stories, use case 2.0, the Kanban ones, and some others.
Awesome. All right. So Simon just gave you guys
reach out on LinkedIn. I'm on there. I think there's not very many Simon Girvans, but happy to connect and happy to take any questions offline if anybody reflects and has something you'd like to ask.
Yeah, and just for those who need it, here is Simon's account on LinkedIn, just so you can find him. There you go. And I think with that, we're going to conclude this session, Simon. Thank you so much for your time and generosity and amazing details and a lot more tools for Kanban proficient people or Kanban curious people to use in their teams. There may be one more question here. Let's wrap it up. Oh, just a thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Nellie. And thank you all for showing up today for this session. We will be here probably again in about a month or two, folks. So if you want to keep track of our Kanban University Partner Series, just sign up for our newsletter and you will be able to get notified about that and so much more that we have to offer. Let me see if I can provide a quick link to that for those who are interested. Let's see. Actually, I may have to find that elsewhere. So yeah, if you go to our website and go to the very bottom, you will find the field, a little form field to pop in your email address and sign up for our newsletter. So just go to our main website and go to the very bottom of the website, and right there is the newsletter submission form. So with that, thank you so much, Simon. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Yeah, you are welcome, sir. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.